Officer Silva didn't flinch. Her eyes, once calm, hardened. "Chief or not, the law applies to everyone, and you've just committed a serious offense. I ask you to cooperate, or I'll be forced to use force." The street, already crowded, began to boo Alcides. Red with rage, he tried to push her. "You crazy woman, you'll regret this. I'll end your career." But it was too late. With surprising agility, Silva forcibly pulled him from the car, ignoring his protests and threats. The breathalyzer was presented, and the alarming result sealed his fate. Amidst the deafening jeers of the crowd, Chief Alcides was handcuffed, his face now pale with humiliation and hatred, as he murmured promises of revenge against the officer who dared to challenge his power. That moment, under the flickering streetlights and the intermittent flashes of cell phones, was etched into everyone's memory. Chief Alcides, once an imposing figure, was now just a handcuffed man, dragged to the patrol car under the overwhelming weight of public humiliation. His face, previously red with fury, was pale, contorted into a mask of pure hatred. Every jeer from the crowd was a hammer blow to his dignity, every shout of "Arrest him! Arrest him!" a nail in the coffin of his reputation. He hadn't just been caught red-handed, he had been unmasked, exposed, and the officer who did it would pay. Silva, for her part, maintained her composure. Every movement was calculated, professional. She ignored Alcides' whispered threats as she pushed him into the back seat of the patrol car. The door closed with a dry thud, sealing not only the chief, but also the fate of a night that would change everything. The sound of handcuffs rattling as he struggled in the cramped space was a grim soundtrack to the triumph of the law. The crowd, once a chorus of boos, now applauded. Shouts of "That's right, officer," and "Congratulations, Silva," echoed, a testament to the public's weariness with impunity. Silva waved briefly, a restrained gesture of thanks, but her eyes were already searching for the vendor, still stunned beside her destroyed cart. Her priority had never been the spectacle, but justice and reparation. "Are you all right?" Silva asked, her voice firm, but with a touch of genuine concern. The vendor, a middle-aged woman with an apron stained with sugarcane juice, nodded slowly, her eyes welling up. "My cart. It's my livelihood, miss." Silva took down her details, promising that the chief would cover all damages. It was the least she could do. That small act of empathy amidst the chaos solidified Silva's image as a true officer, not just an enforcer of rules. Behind the wheel, as the patrol car's engine came to life, Silva felt the weight of the situation. Arresting a chief was not like arresting an ordinary civilian. It was stirring up a hornet's nest. Alcides' threats were not empty. They carried the weight of years of power and influence. He was a wounded snake, and wounded snakes strike with double venom. In the rearview mirror, Alcides stared at her. His eyes, red and swollen, promised hell. "You don't know who you've messed with, Silva. I will destroy you, your career, your life. Everything will turn to dust. I swear." His voice was a low growl, but laden with a chilling intensity that sent a shiver down Silva's spine. She gripped the steering wheel, her jaw clenched. There was no room for fear now, only for the conviction that she had done the right thing. The drive to the precinct was long and silent, punctuated only by Alcides' muffled curses and the patrol car's radio, which seemed oblivious to the storm brewing. Every kilometer traveled was a step deeper into unknown and dangerous territory for Silva. She knew that by crossing the precinct gates with Alcides handcuffed in the back seat, she wouldn't just be delivering a prisoner, she would be declaring war. The arrival at the precinct was met with a sepulchral silence. The few officers on duty, accustomed to the night routine, saw Silva's patrol car and Alcides' face in the back seat. Their eyes widened in shock, disbelief, and in some cases, palpable fear. The murmuring ceased. No one dared to break the tension that hung in the air. It was as if a ghost had entered the premises. Alcides, as he was taken from the patrol car, didn't miss the opportunity to make one last display of his power, even handcuffed. He cast furious glances at his colleagues, who averted their eyes, unable to face him in his disgrace. "No one will forget this," he hissed, his voice hoarse with rage, but audible in the oppressive silence. "No one." Silva led him to the booking room, feeling the heavy stares of her colleagues. Some were admiring, others concerned, and some, she knew, were purely opportunistic, waiting to see who would fall first. But she didn't falter. Her duty was clear, and she would fulfill it to the end, no matter the cost. The line had been drawn, and there was no turning back. Alcides' revenge was a promise, and Silva knew he was a man of his word. The precinct's booking room, usually a haven of monotonous bureaucracy and whispered conversations, transformed into a stage of oppressive silence. Every keyboard click, every turned page, echoed with the force of thunder. Silva led Alcides to the counter, where the clerk, a grey-haired man with tired eyes named Carlos, seemed to have aged 10 years in a minute. His fingers trembled slightly as he picked up the pen, aware that he was about to record the unthinkable, the arrest of a chief by one of his own subordinates. Alcides, though handcuffed, didn't lose his composure. His bloodshot eyes swept the room, stopping on each face, registering every expression of shock or averted gaze. He was a wounded predator, but still dangerous, and his silence was more menacing than any shout. "You're digging your own grave, Silva," he hissed, low enough for only her and the clerk to hear, as she dictated the details of the incident. "And I'll make sure you fall into it with everything you love." Silva ignored him, her voice clear and firm as she detailed the infraction, the breathalyzer, the vendor's cart being run over. Each word was a brick in the wall she was building between her conscience and the abyss of retaliation that awaited her. She felt the stares of her colleagues, some admiring, others fearful, and some, the most dangerous, coldly calculating. Opportunists, waiting to see which way the wind blew. The formality of the booking was armor, but it didn't prevent the poison of Alcides' threats from seeping in. The process of uncuffing Alcides for fingerprinting was tense. He refused to cooperate, forcing Silva to apply firm but controlled pressure. "This is harassment, Silva. Abuse of authority. You'll pay for every touch." Alcides' voice, now louder, echoed down the hallway, attracting more curious and apprehensive glances. It wasn't long before the news reached Captain Almeida, Silva's immediate superior. His arrival was abrupt, a storm in human form with a red face and wide eyes. He stopped at the booking room door, observing the scene with a mixture of fury and despair. "What the hell is going on here, Silva?" His voice was thunder, but there was a thinly disguised tremor. Silva, without flinching, turned to him. "Captain, Chief Alcides was arrested in flagrante for driving under the influence of alcohol and for property damage. The breathalyzer tested positive, and there are witnesses and evidence." She presented the incident report, which Carlos the clerk had already filled out with nervous handwriting. Almeida took the report, his eyes scanning the words as if they were hieroglyphs. He looked at Alcides, who was now smiling with cold malice, and then at Silva, with a mixture of anger and disbelief. "Do you have any idea what you've done, officer? You've just detonated an atomic bomb in the middle of the precinct. Chief Alcides is an influential man. This is going to turn into hell." "My obligation is to the law, Captain," Silva replied, her voice unwavering, "not to anyone's influence." Alcides laughed, a dry, humorless sound. "The law, Silva, the law is for the weak. You'll learn that the hard way." Almeida ignored Alcides for a moment, his focus entirely on Silva. "We could have resolved this another way, Silva, internally. A warning, a temporary suspension." "This wasn't necessary." He gestured, frustration overflowing. "You don't know what he's capable of." "I know what the law demands, Captain," Silva insisted, "and I did what was right." The discussion was interrupted by Almeida's phone ringing. He answered, and the expression on his face changed from anger to icy fear. His eyes widened. "Yes, sir. Understood, sir." "No, sir, no." "Yes, sir." Each "sir" was a nail in the coffin of hope for a peaceful resolution. He hung up, sweat trickling down his forehead. "What is it, Captain?" Silva asked, feeling a chill. Almeida looked at her, his eyes full of a grim warning. "It was the chief of police. He already knows, and he's not happy, not at all. He wants an emergency meeting tomorrow morning, and he wants you there, Silva, explaining every detail." He swallowed hard. "And he wants Chief Alcides in a separate cell without phone access until further notice." Captain Almeida, a man Silva had always seen as a rock, now seemed like a sandcastle crumbling. The order to isolate Alcides was a double-edged sword. It protected the investigation, but also confirmed the gravity of the situation and the fury that would come. Alcides, hearing the order, stopped smiling. His eyes narrowed into slits of pure hatred, fixed on Silva. The promise of revenge, once a whisper, was now a silent scream that filled the air. The line had been drawn. There was no turning back. War had been declared, and Silva knew the first battle would be fought the next morning under the eyes of her superiors. But the real war would be fought in the shadows, where Alcides operated. Captain Almeida, once a rock, now seemed like a sandcastle crumbling under the high tide. The chief of police's order, cold and unequivocal, hung in the air like a sentence. Isolate Alcides. No phone until further notice. It was a double-edged sword. It protected the investigation from immediate interference, but also confirmed the gravity of the situation and the fury that would come. Alcides, hearing the order, stopped smiling. His eyes, once bloodshot with rage, now narrowed into slits of pure hatred, fixed on Silva. The promise of revenge, once an icy whisper, was now a silent scream that filled the air, more deafening than any explosion. The line had been drawn and there was no turning back. War had been declared, and Silva knew the first battle would be fought the next morning under the eyes of her superiors. But the real war would be fought in the shadows, where Alcides operated with macabre mastery. That look from Alcides, before he was taken away, was a poison seeping into Silva's soul. It wasn't just rage. It was the cold certainty of a man accustomed to having the world at his feet, now publicly humiliated. He didn't speak, but his eyes, like incandescent embers, promised a personal hell. Captain Almeida, still pale, gestured for two other visibly uncomfortable officers to take Alcides. The silence that accompanied them down the hallway was heavy, laden with palpable tension. Each step echoed, amplifying the drama of that moment. Alcides didn't physically resist, but his presence was an oppressive force, a constant reminder of his power and the network of influence that protected him. Silva watched him disappear down the hallway, the sound of the cell door closing with a dull thud that seemed to seal not only the chief, but also the fate of her own career. The clerk, Carlos, who until then seemed to have forgotten how to breathe, let out a trembling sigh. He looked at Silva with a mixture of admiration and dread. You're brave, Silva," he murmured, almost inaudible. "Or crazy." Silva merely nodded, the adrenaline beginning to subside, giving way to profound exhaustion and a sense of isolation. The night dragged on. The precinct, usually a cauldron of activity, became a mausoleum. The few officers on duty avoided Silva's gaze. Some, she knew, saw her as a hero, but most saw her as a problem, a thorn in their side that could bring everyone down. The phone rang a few times, but never for her. Each ring was a reminder of the storm brewing, of the gears of power turning behind the scenes, already working to undo what she had done. Silva spent the following hours reviewing the incident report, adding every detail, every piece of evidence, every testimony. She knew she would need an impenetrable armor of facts for the battle ahead. As the sun began to peek over the horizon, painting the sky in shades of grey and pink, Silva felt the weight of the night on her shoulders. She hadn't slept. Her mind was in a whirlwind, replaying every scene, every word, every look from Alcides. She drank bitter coffee, feeling the hot liquid burn her throat but failing to warm her soul. Captain Almeida called her into his office. He looked even more dejected, with deep dark circles under his eyes and a crumpled suit. "Silva," he began, his voice hoarse, "the chief of police is a peculiar man. He values loyalty above all else, and Alcides has many years of loyalty with him." The chief of police's office was an austere environment, with heavy, dark wood furniture and framed diplomas that seemed to observe every movement. The air was dense, laden with formality and an almost electric tension. Besides the chief and Captain Almeida, there were two other high-ranking officers whose faces were masks of seriousness. Silva entered, her posture erect, her uniform impeccable, a stark contrast to the fatigue she felt. The chief of police, a middle-aged man with grey hair and piercing eyes, didn't smile. He didn't offer coffee. He merely indicated a chair in front of his desk. "Officer Silva," he began, his voice grave and emotionless, "Captain Almeida has informed me about an incident involving Chief Alcides. I'd like to hear your version of the facts. Every detail." Silva took a deep breath, feeling everyone's heavy gaze on her. She began to narrate, her voice clear and firm, from the call about the accident, her arrival at the scene, Alcides' state, his refusal to cooperate, the breathalyzer, the vendor's cart being run over, the threats. She omitted nothing, presenting the facts concisely and professionally as she had been trained. As she spoke, the chief of police maintained an inscrutable expression. The other officers made notes in pads, their gazes alternating between Silva and the chief. When she finished, a heavy silence filled the room. The chief leaned slightly forward, his eyes fixed on hers. "I see a delicate situation. However, Officer Silva, I've received information that Chief Alcides was on a confidential, highly important mission at the time of the incident, and that your approach, while technically correct, may have been excessively zealous, and that he was merely tired, was not intoxicated." A shiver ran down Silva's spine. The trap was being set. Alcides' version had already reached the chief, distorted, fabricated to discredit her. He wasn't just defending himself, he was attacking. "With all due respect, Chief," Silva replied, her voice still firm but with a touch of indignation, "Chief Alcides was visibly intoxicated. The breathalyzer registered 0, 90 mg of alcohol in his blood. That's not tiredness. And he ran over a vendor, destroying her livelihood. There was no confidential mission. There was just a drunk and abusive chief." The chief of police tapped his fingers on the table, the monotonous sound echoing in the room. "I understand your position, officer, but a chief's reputation cannot be stained by a misunderstanding, especially when there are larger interests at stake." He paused, and the silence that followed was deafening. "This situation is more complex than you imagine, Silva. Much more complex. The real war," Silva realized, would not be fought with weapons, but with words, with influence, and with the ability to distort reality until the truth became unrecognizable. And she was only on day one. The chief of police's office remained in an oppressive silence, each second an eternity. The tapping of the chief's fingers on the table, once a monotonous sound, now seemed like the ticking of a clock, marking time for an inevitable sentence. Silva felt the rarefied air, the invisible but palpable pressure emanating from that grey-haired man with piercing eyes. He wasn't seeking the truth. He was seeking an exit, a way to sweep the dirt under the rug, and Silva was the broom that refused to cooperate. "Officer Silva," The chief began again, his voice grave and controlled. I understand your passion for justice. It's an admirable quality. However, in our line of work, passion must be tempered with pragmatism, with an understanding of the nuances, of the realities that operate behind the scenes. He paused, his eyes fixed on hers as if trying to read her soul. Chief Alcides has been a pillar of this institution for decades. He has contacts, information, and a network of influence that is vital to the safety of this city. An incident like this, however, regrettable, can have repercussions far beyond what you can imagine. Silva felt a chill. He wasn't just defending Alcides, he was using the city's safety as a shield, as a weapon to justify impunity. Chief, with all due respect, the law must be equal for all. A man's influence cannot justify breaking the law, nor assaulting a citizen. The breathalyzer doesn't lie. The destroyed vendor's cart doesn't lie. His threats weren't nuances, they were intimidation. The chief of police sighed, a sound that seemed more of weariness than frustration. I understand your idealistic perspective, Silva, but the real world is different. And sometimes, to protect the whole, we need to make smaller sacrifices. He leaned further forward, his voice now almost a whisper, but laden with authority. I've received a preliminary report from the legal department. They suggest that your approach, Officer Silva, could be interpreted as excessive zeal, that the removal of Chief Alcides from the vehicle, for example, could be seen as improper use of force, given that he offered no direct physical resistance. The trap was closing. Silva felt bile rise in her throat. They were distorting her every action, turning her professional conduct into a flaw. He refused to get out of the car, Chief. He refused to cooperate. He was agitated, aggressive, and refused to blow into the breathalyzer until confronted. What was I supposed to do? Let him drive away and run over someone else? One of the other officers cleared his throat, and Captain Almeida, who had remained silent until then, pale and tense, shot Silva a warning glance. The chief raised a hand, silencing the room again. I'm not questioning your intention, officer, only the execution and the perception and the politics. This situation, as I said, is complex, and for the good of the institution, we need to find a solution that minimizes damage. He leaned back in his chair, his expression inscrutable. My proposal is as follows. Chief Alcides will be released on bail today. He will be temporarily relieved of his duties, pending an internal investigation which, I assure you, will be conducted with due discretion. As for you, Officer Silva, you will be transferred to a precinct in a more remote district for a period of retraining and re-evaluation. This will give us time for things to settle down, and for you to reflect on the importance of discretion in highly sensitive cases. The proposal was a punch to the gut. It wasn't a dismissal, but it was an exile, a punishment disguised as re-education. It was a way to get her out of the way, to silence her, to erase the incident, and Chief Alcides, the man she arrested, would be released with an internal investigation that she knew would be a farce. With all due respect, Chief, Silva replied, her voice trembling slightly, but her posture still firm. This isn't justice. This is a cover-up. This is validating the impunity of a powerful man and punishing someone who tried to do the right thing. The chief of police's eyes narrowed. The mask of pragmatic cordiality began to crack, revealing cold irritation. Officer Silva, you are putting yourself in a very dangerous position. I am offering you a way out, a way to preserve your career, even if with a small detour. If you refuse, the consequences could be much more severe. We can open an administrative process against you for insubordination, for improper use of force, for defamation of a superior. And frankly, with Chief Alcides' history and the support network he possesses, your chances of prevailing would be minimal. Your career would be over. Think carefully." Silence returned, heavier than before. Silva felt Almeida's gaze, a silent plea for her to yield. But yielding meant betraying everything she believed in, everything she had sworn an oath to. It meant that the law truly was only for the weak. "I cannot accept, Chief," Silva said, her voice now clear and unwavering despite the turmoil in her chest. "I did what was right, and if doing what's right means the end of my career, then so be it. But I will not be an accomplice to a farce." The Chief of Police's expression hardened. Pragmatism gave way to contained fury. "Very well, Officer Silva. Your decision. But don't say you weren't warned." He made a brusque gesture to the other officers. "Prepare the papers. Alcides will be released. And, Officer Silva, you are suspended from your duties, effective immediately, pending administrative proceedings. Hand over your weapon and badge to Captain Almeida." Captain Almeida seemed to age 10 years in an instant. His eyes met Silva's, filled with deep sadness and reluctant respect. War had been declared, not just against Alcides, but against the system that protected him. And Silva, alone, had just fired the first shot. The real battle, she knew, was just beginning, and the shadows of power were already stirring to devour her. The silence that followed the Chief of Police's sentence was no longer oppressive, but cutting, cold as steel. The words, "suspended from your duties, effective immediately," echoed in Silva's mind, each syllable a dry blow. She felt the weight of everyone's gaze in the room, but none was as heavy as her own, reflected on the polished surface of the table. That moment, she knew, would be a turning point. There was no turning back. Captain Almeida, with a sigh that seemed to carry the weight of years of disillusionment, extended his hand. It was a mechanical gesture, but his eyes, filled with deep sadness and reluctant respect, conveyed a silent message. "I understand. I'm sorry." Silva unholstered her weapon, the gun feeling heavier than ever in her hand. It wasn't just a piece of metal, it was an extension of her authority, her ability to protect. Handing it over was handing over a part of herself. The badge, polished and cold, followed suit. The symbol of her identity, of her oath, now rested in Almeida's palm. It was as if they were stripping her of her armor, leaving her exposed and vulnerable. "You may leave, Officer Silva." The Chief of Police's voice was now devoid of any emotion, a final, definitive tone. She turned, her posture still erect, her chin held high, refusing to show any sign of weakness. As she passed the other officers, she felt gazes that varied between curiosity, pity, and perhaps a glimmer of secret admiration. No one said a word. The Chief of Police's office door closed behind her with a soft click, but it sounded like thunder in her ears. The hallway, once a familiar path, now seemed strange, the walls cold, the fluorescent lights excessively bright. She felt every step, the echo of her own shoes on the marble floor, a solitary sound. The news, she knew, would spread like wildfire. In a matter of minutes, everyone in the district would know. The officer who dared to defy the system, the one who was suspended for doing what was right. She would be a hero to some, a fool to most, and a warning to all. As she approached her desk, she saw some colleagues avert their gaze, others murmur something inaudible, and some, like young Officer Mendez, whom she had mentored, offered a look of solidarity mixed with fear. She picked up her bag and her coat, the few belongings that still connected her to that place. There was no formal goodbye, just the heavy silence of a forced departure. As she walked towards the building exit, the patrol car's radio, parked near the door, crackled with a communication. "Unit 3, Chief Alcides released on bail, pending internal investigation. Repeat, Chief Alcides released." The voice on the radio was cold and professional, but for Silva it was a dagger twisting in her wound. He was free. The man she arrested, who threatened, who ran over someone, was loose, and she, the one who arrested him, was suspended, disarmed, stripped of her badge. The injustice was palpable, a bitter taste in her mouth. She stepped out onto the street, the afternoon sun seeming stronger, crueler. Her uniform, once a symbol of pride, now felt like a disguise, an empty shell. Without her weapon, without her badge, she was just an ordinary citizen, but with an extraordinary burden. The city breeze, once refreshing, now felt cutting, reminding her of the solitude of her position. The sight of the vendor's popcorn cart, still dented and abandoned on the corner, hit her like a second punch. That was the reason. That was the real damage. The life of an ordinary person destroyed by the arrogance of a powerful man. And now the powerful man was free, and justice once again had been bent to serve him. Silva took a deep breath, the cold air filling her lungs. Her anger, once an ember, was now a burning flame. They thought they had silenced her, that they had pushed her away. But they were wrong. They had only ignited a fire she didn't even know she possessed. The suspension wasn't the end, it was the beginning. It was proof that the war wasn't just against Alcides, but against the entire system that protected him. And if they wanted a war, she would give them one. She no longer had a badge, nor a weapon, nor the backing of the institution, but she had the truth. And the truth, she knew, was a far more powerful weapon than any revolver. The game had changed. She was no longer an officer following orders. She was a woman on a personal crusade against an enemy who underestimated her determination. The shadows of power were already stirring to devour her. But Silva, disarmed and alone, felt a new and dangerous strength growing within her. The real battle, she knew, was just beginning, and she was ready to fight. The precinct door closed with a dull thud, not a sound of an end, but of an abrupt beginning. The sun, outside, which before seemed a silent accomplice to her downfall, now radiated a strange, almost defiant energy. Silva took a deep breath, the street air laden with the smell of hot asphalt and the promise of an ordinary afternoon. But for her, nothing would be ordinary again. Her uniform, once a second skin, now weighed like a burden, a cruel irony. It was the shell of something she no longer was, at least not in the eyes of the system. Without her badge, without her weapon, she was just a woman in a uniform, a woman who had just defied power and paid the price. The patrol car's radio, with the news of Alcides' release, still echoed in her ears. A sonic slap, reminding her of the impunity she had sworn to fight. Her anger, once an ember, was now a furnace, heating every fiber of her being. They thought they had silenced her, that they had pushed her away, but they were wrong. They had only ignited a fire she didn't even know she possessed. She walked aimlessly for a few blocks, her mind in a whirlwind. The suspension wasn't the end, it was the beginning. It was proof that the war wasn't just against Alcides, but against the entire system that protected him. And if they wanted a war, she would give them one. She no longer had a badge, nor a weapon, nor the backing of the institution. But she had the truth, and the truth she knew was a far more powerful weapon than any revolver. At home, the silence was deafening. Her apartment, once a refuge, now felt like an improvised headquarters, the stage for a battle that had no rules yet. She took off her uniform, each piece a reminder of what she had lost. The weight of the uniform replaced by the weight of uncertainty, but also a dangerous freedom. She was unchained from the ties of hierarchy, bureaucracy, the policies that protected the powerful. It was a frightening freedom, but also liberating. Meanwhile, on the other side of the city, Chief Alcides wasted no time. Bail was paid in record time, a mere formality for someone with his contacts. He left the precinct with a cold smile, rage still bubbling beneath the surface of his false cordiality. The public humiliation, the booze, the breathalyzer. Everything would be paid for with interest. He wasn't one to forget, and even less to forgive. That little officer, Silver! He snarled at his lawyer, a fat, sweaty man who seemed more concerned with keeping his tie straight than listening to his client. She's going to regret being born. I want you to start digging. Everything about her, every traffic ticket, every disagreement with neighbors, every incident report. I want her life exposed, and I want her to feel the weight of what she's done. The lawyer nodded, already accustomed to Alcides' thirst for revenge. We're already working on it, Chief. Our contacts are already activated. Her reputation will be the first to be attacked, and then her personal life. Alcides laughed, a dry, humorless sound. Excellent. And the vendor, the one she was defending, I want her to feel the weight of my influence too. Let her learn not to mess with the wrong people. For Silver, the night brought few answers but many questions. How would she fight? Alone, without resources, against a man with the power of a chief and a network of contacts that stretched across the entire city. The truth, by itself, would not be enough. She would need evidence, allies, a strategy. She picked up her cell phone. Her first impulse was to call Captain Almeida. But what could he do? He had already done what he could, perhaps even more, by trying to warn her. He was part of the system she was now fighting. The only person who might truly understand was the vendor, the silent victim of it all. The woman who lost her cart, her livelihood, because of Alcides' arrogance. The image of the dented cart, abandoned on the corner, returned to her mind. That was the real damage, the life of an ordinary person destroyed by impunity. And now, the powerful man was free, and justice once again had been bent to serve him. They think they've silenced me, Silver murmured to the empty apartment, her voice hoarse but firm. But they've only given me a reason to scream louder. She opened her laptop, her hands trembling slightly, but her mind sharp. If they wanted to dig, she would dig too. Not about herself, but about Alcides, about every suppressed complaint, every shelved case, every whisper of corruption she had ignored in the name of the institution. She was no longer an officer following orders. She was a woman on a personal crusade against an enemy who underestimated her determination. The shadows of power were already stirring to devour her, but Silver, disarmed and alone, felt a new and dangerous strength growing within her. The real battle, she knew, was just beginning, and she was ready to fight. The first step would be to find the vendor. The second, to expose Chief Alcides in a way the system could no longer ignore. She didn't have a plan, but she had a purpose, and that, she knew, was enough to start. Silver's apartment, once a sanctuary of peace after long shifts, was now a silent battlefield. The dim light of the lamp illuminated the laptop screen, where the search bar blinked, inviting her to delve into the depths of the internet. She typed Chief Alcides' name, feeling the weight of each letter, each keyboard click like a step into enemy territory. There was no longer a badge to protect her, nor the structure of the law to guide her. Only her intuition and a cold rage that refused to diminish. She knew Alcides was a man of power, with tentacles that stretched across the entire city, suppressed complaints, shelved cases, whispers of corruption. All of it, before, was just background noise, something to be ignored in the name of the institution. But now the institution had spat her out, and she was free to unearth every secret, every rot the system had swept under the rug. The night advanced, and Silver delved into public records, old news articles, discussion forums. She looked for any inconsistency, any shadow that could reveal the true face of the man who had threatened her. It was like looking for a needle in a haystack. But she had time. Time and a determination bordering on obsession. Every article about Alcides, the incorruptible chief, seemed like a cruel joke, and she felt the bitter irony in every word. Meanwhile, on the other side of the city, Alcides wasted no time. His lawyer, A man who seemed born for the role of a shadow had already activated his network. The first step was to discredit Silva, spread rumors, plant doubts, tarnish her reputation. The gossip and lies machine was already in motion, lubricated by money and power. "I want her life to become hell, Doctor," Alcides had said, his voice low and controlled, but with an intensity that made the lawyer sweat cold. "Start with the small things, a forgotten traffic ticket, a disagreement with a neighbor, anything that can be distorted, and then we'll go for the personal attack. She'll learn not to challenge a man like me." Silva's phone rang, an unknown number. She hesitated, her heart racing before answering. Silence on the other end, just heavy breathing and then a click. It was a warning, a reminder that she was being watched, that her steps would not go unnoticed. The solitude of the apartment became even more palpable, the air heavy with the invisible threat. She hung up, her hand trembling slightly, but her determination solidifying. They wanted to play dirty. She knew how to play too, but her weapon wouldn't be lies, it would be the truth they tried so hard to hide. Morning arrived, bringing with it a new urgency. Silva had spent the night awake, her eyes red, but her mind clearer than ever. She hadn't found the silver bullet that would bring down Alcides, but she found patterns. Complaints from small merchants about extortion, assault cases that were mysteriously shelved, witnesses who disappeared, pieces of a puzzle that, together, began to form a disturbing picture. But before assembling that puzzle, she needed something more immediate. The vendor, the woman who had been the silent victim of it all, the image of the dented cart, abandoned on the corner, was a constant reminder of the real damage, of an ordinary person's life destroyed by impunity. She couldn't fight for herself without fighting for that woman. Silva left her apartment, dressed in civilian clothes, feeling strange without the weight of her uniform and badge. It was as if she had lost a part of herself, but gained another, the freedom to act outside the rules, to be invisible. She walked to the corner where everything had happened. The popcorn cart was still there, a monument to injustice, but the vendor was not. She asked local merchants, residents of the street. No one seemed to know the woman's whereabouts. Some averted their gaze, others murmured excuses, fear visible in their eyes. Alcides had already acted. The vendor had vanished, or hidden, or been silenced. With each, "I don't know," or "I haven't seen," Silva's anger grew. They hadn't just pushed her away, they were erasing the tracks, intimidating witnesses. The vendor was the key, the living proof of Alcides' crime. And now she had disappeared. Silva felt a knot in her throat. This was exactly what Alcides wanted. Isolate the victims, isolate those who challenged him. But she wouldn't give up. The vendor needed help. And Silva, now without a badge, but with a stronger purpose than ever, felt she was the only one who could offer it. She knew the search would be dangerous. Alcides wouldn't hesitate to use all his resources to stop her. But the truth, she knew, was a far more powerful weapon than any revolver, and she was willing to use it. The real battle, she knew, was just beginning, and she was ready to fight. The first step would be to find the vendor, the second, to expose Chief Alcides in a way the system could no longer ignore. She didn't have a plan, but she had a purpose, and that, she knew, was enough to begin. The search for the vendor wouldn't just be an investigation, it would be an act of defiance, a silent scream against impunity, and Silva, disarmed and alone, felt a new and dangerous strength growing within her. The city, once a familiar backdrop, now transformed into a labyrinth of shadows and secrets, where every corner could hide a clue or a trap. She was ready to enter it. The city, once a familiar backdrop, now transformed into a labyrinth of shadows and secrets. Every corner could hide a clue or a trap. Silva was ready to enter it. But the search for the vendor wouldn't just be an investigation. It would be an act of defiance, a silent scream against impunity. She wore civilian clothes, feeling strange without the weight of her uniform and badge. It was as if she had lost a part of herself, but gained another, the freedom to act outside the rules, to be invisible. She began her journey where everything had ended. The corner, the scene of Alcides' humiliation and the cart's destruction, still carried the aura of that day. The dented cart, a monument to injustice, had been removed, but the vendor's absence was even more striking. Silva asked local merchants, residents of the street, but the answers were evasive, their gazes averted. Fear, a dense and palpable fog, hung in the air. Alcides had already acted. The vendor had vanished, or hidden, or been silenced. Every "I don't know" or "I haven't seen" was another brick in the wall of isolation Alcides was building around her. They hadn't just pushed her away, they were erasing the tracks, intimidating witnesses. The vendor was the key, the living proof of Alcides' crime. And now she had disappeared. A knot tightened in Silva's throat. This was exactly what Alcides wanted. Isolate the victims, isolate those who challenged him, but she wouldn't give up. The vendor needed help, and Silva, now without a badge, but with a stronger purpose than ever, felt she was the only one who could offer it. She knew the search would be dangerous. Alcides wouldn't hesitate to use all his resources to stop her. But the truth, she knew, was a far more powerful weapon than any revolver, and she was willing to use it. The first clue came from a small newspaper vendor, an elderly man with tired eyes, who, after much insistence and a promise of anonymity, whispered that the vendor had a sister who lived in a more distant neighborhood on the outskirts. It was a thin thread, but it was a thread. Silva thanked him, feeling a glimmer of hope. Meanwhile, Alcides' machine worked tirelessly. At the precinct, Captain Almeida felt the weight of the pressure. Anonymous reports began to surface, questioning Silva's conduct in old cases, raising doubts about her integrity. Small administrative infractions, previously ignored, were now unearthed and amplified. Her reputation, once impeccable, began to be corroded by whispers and insinuations. Almeida tried to defend her, but the current was too strong. He knew it was a witch hunt, orchestrated by Alcides, but the system had its own gears, and once they started turning, it was hard to stop them. He called Silva, but she didn't answer. He left a voicemail, his voice heavy with concern. "Silva, things are getting ugly here. They're digging up everything about you. Be careful. Very careful." Almeida's message reached Silva while she was on the bus, on her way to the distant neighborhood. She heard the words, feeling a chill down her spine, but the news only solidified her determination. They were attacking her reputation, trying to demoralize her, but she had nothing left to lose. Her badge had been taken. Her career was at risk. The only thing left to her was the truth and the pursuit of justice. The outskirts neighborhood was a stark contrast to the city center. Dirt roads, simple houses, children playing barefoot. Silva felt like an intruder, but the need to find the vendor propelled her. She asked for a woman named Maria, and the name the newspaper vendor had mentioned as being the vendor's sister. People were more open here, less intimidated by Alcides' invisible power. Lie. An old woman pointed to a modest house with a small garden. "Maria lives there, but her sister, the one with the cart, she's not doing well. Doesn't want to see anyone." Silva felt her heart clench. She knew the vendor was suffering, but she needed to talk to her. She needed her testimony, her strength. As she approached the house, Silva noticed a car parked on the corner, a dark, discreet model with tinted windows. A sense of alarm washed over her. Alcides wasn't one to leave loose ends. He knew the vendor was a crucial witness and had probably already sent his watchdogs. She knocked on the door. A woman with a tired face and tearful eyes opened it. It was Maria, the vendor's sister. "What do you want?" she asked, her voice choked. "I'm the officer who arrested Chief Alcides," Silva began, "and I need to speak with your sister. She's in danger, and so am I." Maria hesitated, looking at the car on the corner, and then at Silva. Fear was evident in her eyes, but there was also a glimmer of hope. She opened the door wider, inviting Silva in. Inside the house, the vendor named Anna sat in a chair, her gaze lost in emptiness. Her face was pale, and there was a deep sadness in her eyes. She had lost more than a cart. She had lost her dignity, her security. The sight of her, so vulnerable, rekindled Silva's fury. Alcides had not only humiliated her, he had destroyed a life. "Anna," Silva said, her voice soft but firm, "I know what happened, I saw it, and I'm here to help. But I need you to speak. I need your courage." Anna looked up, her eyes meeting Silva's. There was fear, yes, but also a spark of something more, hope perhaps, or contained anger. The car on the corner started its engine. Time was running out. Silva knew she didn't have much time. She needed to convince Anna to fight, to become the voice the system was trying to silence. The real battle, she knew, was just beginning, and she was ready to fight. But now she was no longer alone. She had Anna, the silent victim, and her sister Maria, who seemed willing to protect her. Together, perhaps they had a chance. The city, once a labyrinth, now seemed like a battlefield, and they were at its center. The rumble of the engine outside wasn't just a sound, it was a premonition, an icy warning that seeped through the walls of the modest house. Silva felt the air thin. Maria, her eyes wide with terror, pulled Anna closer, an instinctive gesture of protection against an invisible but palpable threat. Anna, still in a trance of fear and trauma, barely reacted, her eyes fixed on the window, as if awaiting the materialization of her worst nightmare. "They're here," Maria whispered, her voice trembling, almost inaudible. "He found us." Silva moved to the window, peeking through a gap in the worn curtain. The dark car, once a discreet shadow, now seemed like a predator lurking. The tinted windows concealed who was inside, but the intention was undeniable. Intimidation, silence, perhaps something far worse. "We don't have much time," Silva said, her voice low but laden with an urgency that cut through the air. She knelt before Anna, trying to capture her lost gaze. "Anna, you need to listen to me. They want you to stay silent. They want you to be afraid. But if you don't speak, he'll continue. He'll do this to other people." Anna finally reacted, a tremor running through her fragile body. I can't," she stammered, her voice almost a whisper. He's powerful. He'll hurt me. He'll hurt Maria." Silva took Anna's cold hands, feeling the fragility of those palms that had worked so hard. "I know you're scared. I am too. But you're not alone. I'm here, and there are other people who want justice. But we need you. We need your voice." She looked at Maria, who nodded, her eyes welling up, but with a glimmer of new and desperate determination. "She's right, Anna. We can't let him win. Not again." Outside, the car moved slowly, stopping directly in front of the house. A dark shadow fell across the door. The sound of an engine shutting off. Then, footsteps, heavy, deliberate, announcing the arrival of an implacable force. Silva felt her heart pound in her chest. It was now or never. "Anna, what he did to you wasn't just an accident. It was an abuse of power. He used his badge to humiliate you, to steal your life. You deserve justice, and I promise I will fight for you, even if I no longer have my badge." She took her suspended badge from her pocket, a cold, dull piece of metal, and placed it in Anna's hand. "This no longer defines me. What defines me is the truth. And your truth, Anna, is the most important of all." Anna looked at the badge in her hand, then at Silva, and finally at the door, where the footsteps stopped. The fear was still there, a dense and suffocating fog, but something else began to shine in her eyes, a spark of indignation, of righteous anger. The image of the dented cart, of her destroyed livelihood, of her trampled dignity, must have flashed through her mind. A loud knock on the door. It wasn't a question, it was a demand. Maria jumped, but Silva held her. "Don't open it," she whispered. "They don't have a warrant. They're trying to intimidate you. But what if they—" Maria began, her voice failing. "They can't do anything without a legal reason," Silva replied, though she knew that in Alcides' hands legality was a flexible concept. "But we need to act now." She turned to Anna. "Anna, can you tell me what happened? Everything, from the moment he ran you over until now, every detail." Anna took a deep breath, closing her eyes for an instant. When she opened them, there was a cold resolution, a newly ignited flame. "Yes," she said, her voice still weak, but with a new firmness. "I will tell." The knocking on the door repeated, stronger, more insistent. "Good," Silva said, a momentary relief flooding her. "Maria, do you have a cell phone? We need to record this." Maria, with trembling hands, picked up an old cell phone and handed it to Silva. "Anna, start talking. I'll record. And Maria, keep an eye on the door. If they try to break in, scream. Get the neighbors' attention." Silva positioned the cell phone, activating the recording. "You can start, Anna." Anna began to speak, at first hesitantly, then with a torrent of details, her voice gaining strength as she relived the scene. Alcides' arrogance, the smell of alcohol, the words of contempt, the public humiliation, the fear that made her flee, the intimidation that kept her hidden. Outside, the knocking on the door turned into a shove, a test of the wood's resistance. Silva kept her focus on Anna, recording every word, every tremor in her voice, every tear that streamed down the vendor's face. That was more than a testimony. It was the redemption of a soul, the weapon she needed to bring down Alcides. The door creaked. Maria let out a muffled scream. "Keep going, Anna," Silva urged. "Don't stop." Anna, her eyes fixed on Silva, continued, her voice now a muffled cry of pain and anger. "He said I was nobody, that he could do whatever he wanted." The doorknob turned, forced, a dry crack. Silva knew time was running out. She needed more. She needed irrefutable proof. The recording was a start, but it wasn't the end. She needed to get Anna out of there. Take her to a safe place where her voice could be heard without fear. The door opened slightly, revealing a dark crack. An eye peered inside. "Anna, Maria, we need to get out of here, now," Silva said, stopping the recording, but keeping the cell phone firm in her hand. "Is there a back window or a back exit?" Maria, in a panic, pointed to a side door. "The laundry room. It leads to the backyard." "Go, I'll be right behind you," Silva ordered, her voice full of an authority that went far beyond any badge. She placed herself between the half-open door and the two women, ready to confront whoever was on the other side. Adrenaline coursed through her veins. She was an officer, even without her badge, and her duty was to protect the truth, protect Anna. The man outside pushed the door harder, and it gave way, revealing a corpulent henchman with a cold, calculating gaze. He wasn't there to talk. "Where's the woman?" he snarled, his eyes sweeping the room, fixing on the laundry room door that Maria and Anna had just closed. "She's not here," Silva replied, her voice firm, defiant. The henchman smiled, a humorless grin, a harbinger of violence. "Don't lie to me, officer. We know she is." Silva knew she couldn't hold him off for long. But she would gain precious seconds, seconds that could mean the difference between freedom and eternal silence for Anna. She didn't have a plan, but she had a purpose. And that, she knew, was enough to fight. The city, once a labyrinth, was now a battlefield, and she was at its center, ready for the confrontation. The door creaked, giving way with a dry snap, and the shadow of the corpulent henchman filled the gap. His eyes, cold and calculating, swept the room, searching for the prey Alcides so desperately wanted to silence. Silva's adrenaline surged, an icy fire coursing through her veins. She was an officer, even without her badge, and her duty was to protect the truth, protect Anna. "Where's the woman?" The man's voice was a low growl, but laden with threat. His eyes fixed on the laundry room door that Maria and Anna had just closed, the muffled sound of their hurried footsteps still echoing in Silva's mind. Silva knew she couldn't hold him off for long. He was bigger, stronger, and probably not alone. But she needed to gain precious seconds, seconds that could mean the difference between freedom and eternal silence for Anna. "You don't have a warrant," Silva retorted, trying to use the law as a barrier, even knowing that for men like him, the law was merely a suggestion. "You can't come in here." The henchman's smile widened, revealing yellowed teeth. "Warrant? You think we need a warrant to do Chief Alcides' work?" He took another step, extending an enormous hand to push Silva aside. Silva reacted purely on instinct, her training kicking in. She dodged the outstretched arm, spinning her body and using the momentum to push the henchman's shoulder, throwing him off balance for an instant. It wasn't an attack, but a maneuver to buy time, to create an opening. The man staggered, but recovered quickly, his eyes now flashing with rage. "You'll regret that, officer," he hissed. And his hand flew towards Silva. She ducked, his fist whizzing past her head. The air moved with the force of the blow. Silva used the opportunity to kick the henchman's leg, not with enough force to knock him down, but to destabilize him again. He grunted, but remained standing, the fury on his face intensifying. Meanwhile, in the laundry room, Anna and Maria struggled with the back door. It was an old door, warped wood which always jammed. Maria's panic was palpable, her hands trembling as she tried to turn the rusty doorknob. "Quick, Anna, quick!" Maria whispered, pushing the door with her shoulder. Anna, still shaken, but with the new flame of determination in her eyes, joined her sister. Together they pushed, the creaking of the wood echoing in the small room. The backyard was a tangle of plants and rubbish, surrounded by a low brick wall. Freedom seemed so close, yet still unattainable. Back in the room, Silva knew she couldn't keep up the fight for long. The henchman advanced again, this time with more determination. She saw a wooden chair near the wall and in a quick movement grabbed it, using it as an improvised shield. The man lunged at her, and Silva used the chair to block the blow, the wood cracking with the impact. "Go, go!" Silva shouted, hoping her voice would reach Anna and Maria, giving them more urgency. The henchman, irritated by the unexpected resistance, grabbed the chair and ripped it from Silva's hands, throwing it against the wall with force. The chair shattered. He turned to Silva, his eyes fixed on her. Like a predator finally cornering its prey, Silva retreated, looking for an exit, an object, anything she could use. Her eyes landed on the cell phone in her hand, Anna's recording still there, the vital evidence. She had to protect it. "You won't get what you want," Silva said, her voice breathless but still defiant. The henchman took a step forward, and Silva, without thinking, threw the cell phone aside under an old sofa, hoping it would go unnoticed. It was a risk, but she couldn't fight and protect the phone at the same time. At that instant, a loud noise came from the backyard, a muffled scream from Maria. The henchman hesitated for a second, his eyes turning to the laundry room door. "There's more people out there," he snarled, and Silva knew her time was truly running out. In the backyard, Anna and Maria finally managed to open the door. The sight that awaited them was a nightmare. Another henchman, as corpulent as the first, was blocking the exit to the street, leaning against the wall. He was waiting for them. "Where do you think you're going?" he said, a cruel smile on his face. "Maria, with a desperate cry, grabbed an old broom leaning against the wall and advanced, wielding it like a weapon. It was a futile gesture, but full of courage. The henchman laughed, easily disarming her and throwing the broom aside. Anna, seeing her sister in danger, felt the flame of rage Silva had ignited within her turn into a blaze. She could no longer flee, she could no longer hide, she had to fight. Her eyes swept the backyard and stopped on a bucket of dirty water used for washing the floor. Back in the room, the first henchman, hearing the commotion in the backyard, pushed Silva aside forcefully, throwing her against the wall. She hit her head, feeling a sharp pain, but the adrenaline prevented her from passing out. He ran to the laundry room, eager to join his accomplice. Silva, dizzy but determined, saw the opportunity. She got up, staggering, and ran under the sofa, grabbing the cell phone. The recording was intact. She put it in the inner pocket of her jacket, protecting it with her life. The sound of an intense fight came from the backyard. Shouts, shoves, the noise of something being knocked over. Silva knew Anna and Maria were fighting for their lives. She couldn't leave them alone. She ran to the laundry room, the pain in her head throbbing, but her determination stronger. Reaching the door, she saw the scene, the two henchmen cornering Anna and Maria. Maria was on the ground trying to get up, while Anna, with a strength Silva hadn't expected, had thrown the bucket of dirty water in one of the men's faces. He was blinded, trying to wipe his eyes, cursing. The other henchman, furious, grabbed Anna by the arm, pulling her violently. "You insolent little bitch," he snarled. Silva didn't hesitate. She saw a piece of the broken chair on the laundry room floor, a piece of wood with a sharp point. She picked it up and, with a war cry that surprised even herself, advanced against the henchman holding Anna. "Let her go." "D," Silva shouted, and struck the man's arm with the piece of wood. He released Anna with a roar of pain, turning to Silva, his eyes full of hatred. The three were now in the backyard, the fight spreading. Silva knew she couldn't defeat the two of them alone, but she could create chaos, a distraction. She needed Anna and Maria to escape. "Run! Now!" Silva shouted to the sisters, as the henchman, who had been hit by the water, finally regained his sight and advanced on her. Anna and Maria, seeing the new opportunity, didn't look back. They ran, jumping the low wall, disappearing into the darkness of the alley that led to the back street. The sound of their hurried footsteps fading away was the only music Silva needed to hear. She was alone now, facing Alcides' two henchmen. The pain in her head was intense, but the satisfaction of having protected Anna and the recording was even greater. The city, once a labyrinth, was now a battlefield, and she was at its center, ready for the final confrontation, even if it meant her own end. She had done her part. Now Anna's truth had a chance to be heard. The air in the backyard was dense, laden with fury and sweat. The sound of Anna and Maria's hurried footsteps faded into the darkness of the alley, a melody of hope for Silva, but a cry of defeat for the henchmen. They turned to her, their eyes burning with the frustration of having lost their main prey. Silva was alone, the piece of wood still in her hand, the pain in her head throbbing like a war drum. "You insolent bitch!" The henchman who had been hit by the water roared, advancing first. His fists were like sledgehammers, and he swung them in a wild arc. Silva, with the agility that adrenaline and training provided, dodged, the wind of the blow grazing her face. She knew she couldn't face their brute force. Her goal now was to survive, and more importantly, to protect the evidence she carried. The other henchman, the one who had been hit in the arm, joined the attack, flanking her. Silva was surrounded. The backyard, once a tangle of rubbish and plants, was now a deadly arena. She retreated, using the piece of wood to block a blow, feeling the impact vibrate in her bones. The wood cracked, threatening to break. "Where did they go, officer?" The first henchman snarled, his face contorted into a mask of hatred. "You'll tell us, or we'll make you regret being born." Silva didn't answer. She spun, trying to create space, her eyes searching for an escape route, anything she could use. There was a pile of rubble in the corner, perhaps a temporary hiding place or an improvised weapon, but they were fast, and the pain in her head was starting to blur her vision. The henchman holding the injured arm grabbed her from behind, immobilizing her arms. Silva struggled, thrashing, but her strength was no match for his. The other henchman approached, a cruel smile spreading across his lips. "Let's see what you've got that's so important, huh?" He began to search her pockets, his hands large and rough. Panic froze Silva's veins. The cell phone. She had to protect it. With one last, desperate effort, she twisted her body, kicking backward with all the strength she had. Her heels struck the shin of the henchman holding her, and he let out a grunt of pain, loosening his grip for an instant. It was enough. Silva broke free, falling forward, but already getting up, the piece of wood still in her hand. She saw the henchman, who was searching her, approach, and in an instinctive movement threw the piece of wood with force. She didn't aim to seriously injure, but to distract. The wood hit the man's shoulder, and he staggered, cursing. She ran towards the wall, the only exit left. If she could jump, perhaps she would have a chance in the dark alley, but her pursuers were right behind her. The henchman with the injured arm, now even more furious, reached her first, grabbing her by the hair and pulling her back with brutality. The pain was excruciating, and Silva fell to her knees. "Think you're going to escape?" he hissed, pulling her up by the collar of her jacket. "No one escapes Chief Alcides." The other henchman approached, his eyes fixed on her. "Where's the cell phone?" "Officer, we know you have something." Silva felt her heart race. They knew, or at least suspected. She couldn't let them take the cell phone. It was Anna's only hope, the only evidence against Alcides. She had to keep it safe, even if it cost her life. "I don't know what you're talking about," Silva lied, her voice hoarse but still defiant. She spat on the ground, a gesture of contempt that only served to further fuel the men's rage. The henchman holding her tightened his grip on her collar, cutting off her breath. "You'll talk, or we'll make you talk." He shoved her against the wall, Silva's head hitting the rough surface again. Stars danced in her vision, and dizziness washed over her. As he held her pressed, the other henchman began to search her more aggressively, his hands rummaging through every inch of her jacket. Silva tried to resist, but she was immobilized, the pain and dizziness weakening her. She felt his hand approach the inner pocket where the cell phone was stored. No, with a force that seemed to come from the depths of her soul, Silva headbutted the chin of the henchman holding her. He let out a cry of pain and released her, stumbling backward, hands to his face. The opening. Silva turned to the other henchman, who was about to reach the cell phone. She had no time to think. Her instinct took over. She threw herself against him, not to fight, but to knock him down and create a distraction. The two fell to the ground in a tangle of limbs. The cell phone slipped from Silva's pocket on impact, falling under a dense jasmine bush that grew along the wall. She saw for an instant the gleam of the screen before it disappeared into the darkness of the leaves. "What is that?" The henchman, who had been headbutted, recovered and advanced, furious. He kicked Silva in the ribs, and she let out a groan of pain, the air leaving her lungs. The other henchman, who was on the ground with her, grabbed her and pulled her up, throwing her against the wall again. "Where's the damn cell phone?" he snarled, his eyes frantically scanning the ground. Silva coughed, feeling a sharp pain in her ribs, but a thread of hope ignited in her chest. The cell phone was hidden. They didn't have it. "I don't have anything," she insisted, her voice weak, but her determination unwavering. The two henchmen began to search the backyard, kicking through the rubbish and plants, desperately looking. Silva knew it was only a matter of time until they found it. She needed more time. Suddenly, a distant sound, a siren. Not a police siren, but something sharper, more urgent. An ambulance, or perhaps... The henchman stopped. Their eyes meeting. The siren was approaching. Chief Alcides didn't want attention. Not there, not now. "Damn it!" one of them cursed. "We have to get out of here!" They cast one last furious glance at Silva, who was leaning against the wall, panting, but with a triumphant gleam in her eyes. They didn't have her, and they didn't have the cell phone. "This isn't over, officer." The henchman with the injured arm hissed, pointing a finger at her. "Alcides will find you, and when he does, you'll wish you had given us what he wants." With that, the two turned and ran to the laundry room door, disappearing into the dark house. The sound of their footsteps fading echoed for a moment, and then silence fell over the backyard, broken only by the approaching siren. Silva slid to the ground, exhausted, the pain in her body screaming, but a faint smile played on her lips. She had done it. Anna and Maria were safe, and the evidence was secure. For now. The siren was very close now, and Silva knew she needed to act. She dragged herself to the jasmine bush, her hands fumbling among the leaves until she found the cell phone. The screen was cracked, but it still worked. The recording was there. She got up with difficulty, her body protesting every movement. The city, once a labyrinth, was now a battlefield, and she had won a small but crucial skirmish. But the war was far from over. Alcides wouldn't give up. And Silva knew that from now on, every shadow, every corner, every face could be a threat. The hunt was just beginning, and she was the prey. But now she had a weapon, and the truth, she knew, was the most powerful of all. She needed to find a safe place, and fast, before the siren brought more trouble or before Alcides sent more men. The fight for justice was just beginning. The sound of the siren tore through the night, a sharp wound in the rapidly approaching darkness. Silva, leaning against the wall, felt the pain in her ribs and the throbbing in her head. But the relief of having the cell phone in her hands was a strange balm. The screen, cracked like a spiderweb, still showed life, the promise of truth. She had done it, by a hair's breadth, by a stroke of luck, by sheer stubbornness. Alcides' henchmen had disappeared into the darkness of the house, their hurried footsteps echoing the fury of defeat. They were rabid dogs, but even dogs retreat from an unexpected alarm. The siren, now deafening, wasn't for her. It was a fire truck, or perhaps an ambulance, passing by the main street, oblivious to the deadly drama unfolding in the alleys. But for Silva it was a sign, a brief but precious moment of distraction. She got up with a muffled groan, every muscle protesting. Her body was a canvas of pain, but her mind was sharp, focused. There was no time for luxuries like rest or healing. She needed to get out of there. The backyard, once a battlefield, now seemed like an abandoned stage. Shadows dancing with the night breeze. She dragged herself to the low wall, the same one Anna and Maria had jumped over. The dark alley seemed like an invitation, a promise of anonymity. With an effort that seemed to drain the last drop of energy from her body, Silva pushed herself up. The pain in her ribs was excruciating, but she ignored it. Adrenaline still coursed through her veins, both a poison and a remedy. She fell awkwardly on the other side, rolling to absorb the impact. The smell of garbage and dampness from the alley enveloped her, but it was the smell of freedom. The alley was a labyrinth of shadows, narrow and winding, flanked by high walls and cramped houses. Silva moved as fast as she could, limping, her eyes scanning every corner for any movement, any threat. The siren receded, its wail diminishing until it became a distant whisper, swallowed by the city's noise. The silence that followed was almost more frightening, foreshadowing the return of the hunters. She needed a refuge, even if temporary, a place where she could breathe, think, and perhaps, just perhaps, stop the bleeding on her head. Her fingers touched the wound, feeling the sticky liquid. It wasn't deep, but the pain was constant, a cruel reminder of the night's brutality. Turning a corner, she saw a rusty metal ladder leading to the roof of one of the houses. It was precarious, but it offered a vertical escape route, an observation point. With a new surge of determination, Silva began to climb, each step a challenge, each movement an agony. The metal creaked under her weight, a sound that seemed too loud in the night silence. On the roof, the cold pre-dawn wind hit her, bringing with it the smell of smoke and the promise of a new day. She crouched behind an old water tank, her heart beating wildly. From there she could see the extent of the favela, a sea of roofs and faint lights, dotted with TV antennas and tangled wires. The city, below, seemed indifferent to her struggle. She pulled the cell phone from her pocket, the cracked screen reflecting the distant lights. The recording. It was the only thing that mattered now. She touched the audio icon, and for a moment the night's silence was filled with Alcides' voice, cold and calculating, revealing his crimes. The evidence. It was there, intact. But what to do with it? Who to trust? The system was rotten, corroded by Alcides' influence. Going to a precinct was suicide. He had eyes and ears everywhere. She needed someone from outside, someone not under the chief's thumb. An investigative journalist, an old contact she barely trusted, but who might have the courage to face the monster. Silva's head throbbed and dizziness threatened to overwhelm her. She needed water, a bandage, a moment of peace. But peace was a luxury she couldn't afford. Alcides wouldn't give up. He knew she had something, and the fury of a powerful, unmasked man was a force to be feared. He wouldn't rest until she was silenced, and the recording destroyed. She was alone, wounded, hunted, but she wasn't defenseless. She had the truth, and the truth she knew was the most dangerous weapon of all. But how to fire it? How to make this small recording, hidden in a cell phone with a cracked screen, bring down an empire of corruption? The night advanced, and with it, the urgency. She couldn't stay on that roof for long. With each passing minute, Alcides was one step closer to finding her. She needed a plan, and she needed it now. Her eyes swept the horizon, searching for an answer in the distant city lights, a sign, a direction. The fight for justice wasn't just about arresting criminals, it was about surviving to tell the story. And Alcides' story needed to be told. She was the only one who could do it. The cold, pre-dawn wind whipped across the rooftop, an icy reminder of the solitude that enveloped her. Silva huddled behind the water tank, the cell phone clutched in her hand like a talisman. The cracked screen, a map of broken veins, reflected the distant city lights, each point of light a promise of life that seemed so far from her reality. She had the evidence. Alcides' cold, calculating voice recorded irrefutable, the truth. But what was truth without a megaphone to amplify it, without a pulpit to proclaim it? Irony was a bitter poison in her mouth. An officer hunted like a criminal for doing the right thing, for daring to confront power, for believing that the law applied to everyone. Alcides, the chief, the man who should uphold justice, had become the predator, and she the prey. The hunt was no longer a metaphor, it was the raw reality of her existence. The pain in her ribs throbbed, a constant and excruciating rhythm, accompanying the accelerated beat of her heart. The wound on her head burned, but adrenaline still kept her on her feet, a stubborn flame in the midst of darkness. She needed a plan. Not an escape plan, but an attack plan. Because the truth, she knew, was not just a weapon, it was a bomb, and she needed to know where to detonate it to cause maximum damage. Her eyes swept the horizon, searching for an answer in the distant city lights, a sign, a direction. Who to trust? The system was rotten, corroded, Alcides' roots extending through every department, every office. Going to a precinct was suicide. Handing the recording to any of her colleagues would be the same as handing it directly into Alcides' hands. He had eyes and ears everywhere, an invisible web of loyalties and fears. A name surfaced in her mind, hesitant at first, then with more force. A name she had kept in a dusty corner of her memory, a contact from her early days on the force before cynicism settled so deeply. A journalist. Not just any journalist, but one of the few who still seemed to care more about the truth than about headlines. A lone wolf, known for his relentless investigations into police corruption. Ricardo. He was a risk, a man with a reputation for recklessness, for diving headfirst into snake pits. But perhaps, just perhaps, that was exactly why he was the only hope. He had nothing to lose, or at least he seemed to act as if he didn't, and he had the means, the platform to expose Alcides to the world. But how to reach him? How to deliver the recording without being intercepted? The cell phone, despite being cracked, was still her only line of communication. She needed a safe place, a temporary refuge to think, to plan, to stop the bleeding, and perhaps, just perhaps, get a few hours of sleep. The rooftop, while offering a panoramic view, was not a hiding place. With each passing minute, Alcides was one step closer to finding her. The fury of a powerful, unmasked man was a force to be feared, and she knew he wouldn't rest until she was silenced and the recording destroyed. With a muffled groan, Silva dragged herself to the edge of the roof, where the rusty metal ladder descended into the dark alley. Every movement was an agony, a protest from her tired muscles. The metal creaked under her feet, a sound that seemed to echo throughout the favela, an invitation to her pursuers. She descended step by step, the darkness of the alley swallowing her again. The smell of garbage and dampness enveloped her, but now there was a new smell, the metallic scent of her own blood mixing with the dust. She moved as fast as she could, limping, her eyes scanning every corner for any movement, any threat. The alley was a labyrinth of shadows, narrow and winding, flanked by high walls and cramped houses. Turning a corner, she spotted a sliver of light, a half-open door, belonging to a house that seemed abandoned, with broken windows and faded graffiti. It was a risk, but the need for a hiding place was stronger than the fear. Cautiously, she pushed the door, which creaked in protest, and slipped inside. The interior was dark and dusty, the air heavy with the smell of mold and abandonment. Old, broken furniture lay under sheets of dust, ghosts of a life once lived there. Silva hid behind an overturned sofa, her heart beating wildly. She was exhausted, but her mind was sharp, focused. She pulled the cell phone from her pocket, the cracked screen reflecting the distant lights, the recording. It was the only thing that mattered now. She touched the audio icon, and for a moment, the night silence was filled with Alcides' voice, cold and calculating, revealing his crimes. The evidence, it was there, intact. She needed Ricardo, and she needed a plan to reach him. The night advanced, and with it, the urgency. The fight for justice wasn't just about arresting criminals, it was about surviving to tell the story. And Alcides' story needed to be told. She was the only one who could do it. With each passing minute, the sun approached, and with it, the promise of a new day and new dangers. She needed to act. Now. The darkness of the abandoned house was a heavy cloak, but Silva's mind was clearer than ever. Urgency was a fire in her veins. She needed to act now. Every second was a step by Alcides in her direction. The smell of mold and abandonment mingled with the metallic scent of her own blood, a constant reminder of the night's brutality. She fumbled on the floor, searching for something, anything that could serve as a bandage or a weapon. Nothing. The house was a tomb of memories, empty of any present utility. Darkness was her only ally, her disguise. But darkness also hid dangers. The cell phone, the cracked screen, a map of her own fragility, reflecting the distant city lights. But the recording was there, intact. Alcides' voice, cold and calculating, the irrefutable evidence of his crimes, of his corruption. She needed Ricardo. The name echoed in her mind, a mantra of hope and despair. Ricardo, the lone wolf, the journalist who didn't fear the shadows, the only one who might have the courage to face the monster. But how to reach him? How to deliver the bomb without it exploding in her own hands? Every tap on the cell phone's keyboard was a risk. Every second online, a door opened to Alcides. She needed to be quick, direct, enigmatic enough not to reveal too much if the call was intercepted, but clear enough for Ricardo to understand the gravity of the situation. She dialed the number she had kept for years, a relic of a more naive past, before cynicism settled so deeply. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times, each ring a hammer in her chest, and then a hoarse, sleepy voice answered. "Hello?" Ricardo's voice, tired but unmistakable. "Ricardo, it's me, Silva. I don't have much time." Her voice was a hoarse whisper, almost inaudible, but laden with an urgency he would surely catch. There was a pause on the other end, a moment of recognition and shock. "Silva, where are you? What happened?" "I'm being hunted. I have something that will bring down Alcides. A recording." She couldn't afford flourishes. The truth, raw and bare. "A recording? Are you sure?" The disbelief in his voice was palpable, but also a thread of journalistic excitement. "Absolutely. But I can't deliver it over the phone. I need a meeting, alone, no one else." The condition was non-negotiable. Where? When? He was already processing, his news hunter instinct activated. "Tomorrow, at first light, at the old pier. You know the one. Come alone, and don't tell anyone." The pier, an isolated place with escape routes familiar to both of them. "Silva, this is madness. He'll hunt you to hell." "He's already hunting me, but he won't get me. Not before I expose the truth. Are you in or out?" The decision was his, but she wouldn't give him a choice. The truth needed a megaphone. "I'm in, but be careful, he's dangerous." The concern in his voice was genuine. "I know. See you there." She hung up, sweat trickling down her forehead. Adrenaline pulsed through her veins. The plan was set. Now she just needed to survive the night. She huddled even further behind the overturned sofa, trying to become invisible. Every creak of the wood, every whisper of the wind, seemed like the approach of her pursuers. She could feel Alcides' eyes on her, even from a distance. His rage was palpable, a suffocating heat that enveloped her. She needed to rest, but sleep was an enemy, a door open to vulnerability. She clutched the cell phone to her chest, the recording, her only hope, her only weapon. The hours dragged on, an eternity of pain and vigil. The sky began to lighten, a pale grey, slowly tinged with pink and orange. The smell of morning, of dew and wet earth, replaced the mold of the house. The hum of the favela began to awaken. It was time. She got up, every muscle protesting, every wound burning. Dizziness hit her, but she ignored it. There was no time for weakness. Getting out of the favela was a challenge in itself. The alleys, once dark and menacing, now revealed the life beginning to awaken. Children playing, the smell of coffee, the murmur of conversations. But for Silva, every face was a potential traitor, every shadow a hiding place for Alcides' men. She blended into the crowd, a ghostly figure among the living, keeping her head down, her eyes scanning the horizon, her senses sharpened for any sign of danger. She limped through the narrow streets, the pain in her ribs and head a constant reminder of her mission. The pier, the smell of salt and fish, the sound of waves gently breaking. The sun rose on the horizon, painting the sky with vibrant colors. She was there, at the meeting point,